everyone, welcome back to the journey of my YouTube channel and welcome to fall, which I have been ready for a long time. I love fall. It finally feels like fall around here, and I have been enjoying seeing people recommend specifically fallish books. I've been enjoying videos from people like Danny Dabbles and Paperbacks and Ponytails and Kelly Reads a Lot and Elliot Brooks, and I'm sure there are so many people who have been posting videos about their fall book recommendations, and I always think that that is really fun. And I also might have made one of my biggest library trips ever and gotten a whole bunch of books at once that are kind of fallish books. They're sort of fairy tale-ish books. Some of them are specifically fall, some of them less so, but they all feel like good autumn books. And there's also another reason that I got these particular books right now that I'll mention at the end of the video, so you can stick around if you want to hear that. But regardless, I have a large stack of books sitting next to me that I got from the library recently that I've been working my way through. We'll see if I can actually read them all before I have to take any of them back, and I also might have some more books on hold at the library that I will also tell you about once I've gone through the stack of books that I have with me here. So the library is probably wondering what in the world is wrong with me for getting so many books, but I've been really enjoying so far the ones that I've gotten in this library haul, so hopefully I will like all of them as much as I have generally been liking the ones that I have started so far. I will start with I'm Afraid You've Got Dragons by Peter S. Beagle, because I have already finished this book. I read it all in one day. It's quite short and it's pretty fast-paced. It's a fairly simple story. It feels kind of like watching a movie in that it's not that long, it's not that complicated, and it's pretty quick, and it's very easy to just take in all in one sitting. And I'm glad that I did read it all in one day, because I felt like that was kind of the optimal way to experience this story. It reminded me a lot of How to Train Your Dragon, but kind of if How to Train Your Dragon happened in more of a fairy tale world versus a Viking world. And this book is about Robert, who is a dragon exterminator. He gets rid of the dragon pests that live in people's houses and even the royal castle. But Robert really hates this job. He only works it because he inherited it from his father. There's kind of nothing else that he can do to provide for his family, but he really wants to get out of this job, or at least wishes that he could, because he loves dragons. He saves dragons when he can. He has this gift for naming dragons, and the last thing that he wants to do is exterminate dragons. But he ends up going on an adventure that involves some dragons and also a princess and a knight hero kind of character. There's a well, I was about to say something that might have been a tad bit spoilery, so I won't say that, but suffice it to say that this story is a whole lot of fun, and it feels like the kind of fantasy story that would be a classic, even though it is brand new. It just came out last year, I believe. It feels like the kind of classic fantasy story that you remember from childhood. It has a lot of familiar fantasy tropes, which I always really enjoy that. And overall, I just thought it was a very good time. This is the same author as The Last Unicorn, which is one of my favorite books ever. I love The Last Unicorn so much, both the book and the movie. I'm hoping that a movie gets made of this. I would 100% watch a movie of this. I still like The Last Unicorn a little bit better. It's still my personal preference. I'm Afraid You've Got Dragons is very different in that it's much more lighthearted than The Last Unicorn, but it still deals with some similar themes of illusion versus reality, which I love how Peter S. Beagle writes about that theme. So it's a bit different. It does have an omniscient POV, which some people might find trips them up a little bit. I was personally okay with it. But yeah, overall, I just really enjoyed this one. Next up, we have The Sum of All Men by David Farland, which I was a little confused. Wouldn't you look at this book and think it's titled The Rune Lords? But I don't think it is, though. I think that's the name of the series, and I think the name of the book is The Sum of All Men, despite the fact that those words appear nowhere on this cover. Other than that, I think it's a cool cover. The cover is half the reason why I picked it up at the library, but it doesn't seem to actually have the title on it, but oh well. The other reason is that David Farland was a speaker at Realm Makers the first year I went to that writers conference, so I thought it would be really cool to read a book that he had written. I wasn't quite sure what to expect from it, and I am about like 40% of the way through the book now. So far it's been really interesting. I wasn't quite sure at first. The first couple chapters kind of made me like, I don't know if I'm sure about these characters, but the characters have grown on me, and the magic system is mind-blowing. Like I don't even know what to do with this magic system in my mind, except that it's amazing and I love it. It's incredible, and I don't really want to tell you anything about it because it's revealed so gradually and in such smart ways throughout the story that I don't want to ruin any of that for you. But suffice it to say, it feels very much like a pre-Mistborn, like a pre-Brandon Sanderson type of magic system. This book was published in 1998, I think, so so before Mistborn came out. But it's sort of a similar idea of magic system to that, but it's just so connected to the emotional core of the story, which sometimes I feel like magic systems, if they're more of a hard magic system, can be kind of disconnected from the emotional core of the story, whereas I think this hard magic system just does an incredible job of being so connected to what the characters and the themes are all about, and I'm interested to see more of that as the book goes on. It's one of those books with very big world building, and there are just so many things in the world, so many types of creatures and people, and different ways that magic works in the world that we'll see if it can all come to a satisfying conclusion. I really hope it does. But so far, just so much interesting stuff in here. Again, lots of fantasy tropes. There's some kind of chosen one like stuff going on. One of the main characters is a prince who seems to be something of a chosen one, who will need to save the world from this invading villain who's coming into a neighboring kingdom, and the princess of that kingdom, this prince wants to marry, like, both for political reasons and for personal reasons at the same time. So that's kind of an interesting situation. But then the villain who's invading, I was like, oh, this is a pretty cool, interesting villain, when we were just hearing about him from a distance. And then we started interacting with the villain, like, up close as a character. I was like, okay, the interesting factor of this villain just got dialed up to 11. He's disturbing. He's a disturbing villain, but in some just really interesting ways. So I am very interested to see where this book goes from here. I think it could for sure end up being a 5-star read. We'll see. We'll see how it pulls off some of the things that it set up, but it could be a 5-star read. So I'm very, very interested and slightly concerned, but like in a good way, mostly, I think. In terms of content, this book does have some like adult themes, some violence, some, typically what you would expect in an adult fantasy. Similar to Mistborn, probably like a 16 and up kind of read. Next up is Emily Wilde's Encyclopedia of Fairies, which I'm also about 40% of the way through. And this one is kind of refreshingly different from some of the other fantasy books that I'm reading this fall because it takes place in our world. It takes place in 1909. So that just makes the setting and the feel and the vibe of the story very distinct from the other ones. This one does specifically take place in fall, though, as does The Sum of All Men, as you could probably tell from the cover. It is a specifically fall story. This one also takes place in fall. It's going to go into winter also, it would seem. And it takes place on a small Scandinavian island in a small village. So I didn't know that about the book before I started, but that's been fun, just to kind of settle into the vibes and the atmosphere of that. And it does really let you settle into the vibes and the atmosphere. It's been a little bit slower paced than I expected because it's called the Encyclopedia of Fairies, and I was like, okay, I'm ready to see the fairies. And just so you know, it takes a little bit longer to get to the fairies than I thought it would, but I have now started getting to the fairies by this point in the story. So we're there, stuff's happening, I'm liking it. This book is about Emily Wilde, no surprise there, who is a 30-year-old Cambridge professor who is doing field work researching fairies. And I do think it's a lot of fun to have the academic and scholarly side combined with the fairy tales and folklore. And to some extent, there's some real world inspiration for the fairy tales and folklore that Emily Wilde is researching. So in a sense that almost it kind of blends it with reality, feeling like, well, you kind of could academically study a lot of these things. A lot of these stories people really do academically study, but just, in this book there's the slight difference that she is actually interacting with fairies and not just learning about them. And Emily is very good at what she does as far as writing academic papers and researching things, but she's not so good at interacting with people. That is where she struggles. And I think a very large number of people who love books, including me, can relate to that type of character who feels a lot more comfortable with book learning and with fantastical creatures than with starting conversations with people and learning how the culture of a new community works. So that's a lot of fun. The romance aspect so far isn't my absolute favorite. I'm not a big fan of the trope where it's like the girl is just constantly annoyed with him because he's just so perfect that it's just so annoying. That's not really my favorite, but if you do like that kind of dynamic, then you'll probably enjoy this a lot. And I think that there will be a very large number of things about this book that I do end up really enjoying. Next up is Starter Villain, which I have kind of only just started. I kind of just got to the part, I think, where the story really kicks off. And it has been very interesting so far. There's a good chance you've seen this cover around somewhere already. Once you see this cover, you never forget it. Yeah, the cat in the suit. And from reading descriptions of this, I had no idea why there was a cat in the suit. I have gotten just far enough in the story to know why there is a cat in a suit, or at least one reason. I've at least started finding that out. The beginning was a little different than I expected because it also takes place in this world, and it doesn't feel like a fantasy or sci-fi story for quite a while, except that you can tell that something is off, something is weird, and it is going to be speculative fiction. I'm still not entirely sure how much fantasy and how much sci-fi it is, because I read the blurb for this book, but I think there are several things that the blurb didn't want to spoil for us, so at this point it feels like is maybe kind of similar to how Marvel explains some of their scientific stuff, where like it's really a fantasy thing, but we'll throw a few science words at it just because you're not supposed to worry about the science. It's more like fantasy. But anyway, this book is about a guy named Charlie who is really having quite a miserable life. And then his uncle dies, and Charlie starts getting involved in what his uncle was doing, and it turns out that his uncle was running a villain business. I haven't really gotten far enough in the book yet to know exactly what that looks like, but it sounds like a lot of interesting things are about to happen. It's very funny, it's very fast-paced, it's easy to read a lot at a time. Even though I'm not that far in, I did this all in one sitting. It's interesting. We will see where this one goes. This is another one where I'm like, okay, this could be very interesting, and I'm not entirely sure where it's going to go in a lot of ways, but I am definitely intrigued to know more of what's going to happen and find out more about the cats and the villainy business and what Charlie is going to do about this new situation that has come into his life. I tend to really enjoy stories where the main character starts out just having a kind of crummy life in a very mundane kind of way, and they feel like there is just sort of no way out, and then something fantastical happens to them and gives them sort of a whole new chance to do things right and have a much better life and get a new start. So I think that's probably what this is going to be, and if so, I will probably like that. So far, content-wise, I would say the language is like strong PG-13, but there hasn't been anything else content-wise so far, and there is a Silmarillion reference in this book. And if you've heard me talk much about the Silmarillion, you will not be surprised to know that that in itself, like whatever else this book does, I think it has won my undying loyalty, at least for the Silmarillion reference, if for nothing else. There was a very, very correct, very accurate Silmarillion reference that I have not gotten over. So if you will be really, really happy to see a Silmarillion reference in a book, then maybe you want to at least read the first few chapters of Starter Villain. The last of the books from this library haul that I have started so far is Neverending Story, which, like The Last Unicorn, I love the 80s movie of this, and I watched the movie before reading the book, same as with The Last Unicorn, so I'm sorry for not reading the book first, but the good thing about the movies is that in both cases, they convinced me to read the book. And so far, I am just enjoying this so much. Again, it's a specifically fall story. It takes place in November, or at least the frame story takes place in November. And this book is about Bastian, who is a 12-year-old kid who is getting bullied and has lost his mom, and really just about the only thing that he feels good at or that gives him a lot of joy in life is imagination and stories. And he obtains, in some spurious circumstances, this book called The Neverending Story and sneaks off to his school attic to spend the day reading this book, The Neverending Story. And so we get parts of the story that are about Bastian and what he's doing while he's reading this book, but then the bulk of the book is actually the story, The Neverending Story. So it's one of those story within a story books. And so far, I'm not very far in, but so far it's been pretty much identical to the movie, which is interesting because I think I've heard that it diverges more as the story goes on. But I've really enjoyed revisiting the story in book form, and the fact that I know where the stuff is going makes it even more enjoyable, because in some ways it's a little bit more of a, at least within the never-ending story, like within the story, it's maybe a little bit of a slower opening. It takes a while to get to the main character. So I might be a little confused and like, what are we doing if I hadn't seen the movie? But the fact that I have seen the movie helps me to really enjoy that. I think it's even more fascinating in the book to encounter the Nothing, which is the antagonist of the story, which is basically causing various locations and things and people in this fantastical world to just not exist. And the way that it's described is just so haunting and eerie, and the Nothing sounds like it would be a very like tropey or stereotypical fantasy antagonist, but somehow it feels really unique, and I think that's just because it's executed so well. So I'm excited to read the rest of the story and see if the rest of it continues to match up with the movie as much, and if not, what else is in the book that's not in the movie. But yeah, so far, really enjoying the Neverending Story a whole lot. So now we get to the books that I have not started yet, and I think it's appropriate that I'm doing them last because I think these books maybe veer a little bit more into winter vibes than fall vibes. The first one is For the Wolf, which I have been thinking about reading for a very long time, and I remember reading the first couple chapters of it in an Amazon sample a few years ago, and I don't remember that much of what the whole story is about. I remember some of what I read, but I've forgotten kind of a lot of what the story is about, which I think is nice because I will have fun just discovering it as I read the book. But I think the main premise is that in this fantasy kingdom, there are two royal sisters, and one of them has to rule the kingdom, and one of them has to be, for the wolf, kind of sacrificed for the rest of the kingdom. And I don't remember everything about how that works. I'm pretty sure there's a sequel called For the Throne or For the Crown. You guys can correct me in the comments and tell me which one it is. But I think this will be a lot of fun. I think it'll be interesting to read as a book that kind of is a dark fairy tale and that probably uses a lot of fairy tale tropes. Obviously, we're playing on kind of a Red Riding Hood kind of reference here, just based on the title and the cover. But from what I understand, this book also does some interesting things with those fairy tale tropes. So we'll see what I think. I have high hopes for it. Although it's YA to my understanding, and YA tends to be kind of hit and miss for me. But I think that this could be the kind that I like. I tend to like wolf stories, so we'll see how this goes. I also have Spinning Silver, which is another one that I have been meaning to read for such a long time and finally got my hands on. So I'm very excited for this. I keep hearing people say that this one is really good, and it is an actual fairy tale retelling of Rumpelstiltskin. So I think it'll be really interesting to see how Naomi Novik keeps the original elements of the fairy tale and adds in new and different elements. So I think that'll be really interesting. I didn't realize how long it is, so I'm like, oh, I hope I can read this before I have to take it back to the library. But hopefully it will just be so interesting and engrossing that I will read it really fast. And the last of the books that I have here is The Bear and the Nightingale, which is another fairy tale retelling of East of the Sun, West of the Moon. It sounds to me like it probably has some similar elements to For the Wolf in some ways. But we'll see. Again, this is yet another book that I have been eyeing for a long time, and I've kind of forgotten some of what it's about. But I think the basic idea is that a girl gets sent into the woods to be something of a sacrifice to the bear character. But then it ends up being a little bit of a Beauty and the Beast-like idea, potentially. I feel like I should know this fairy tale better, but I'm really not familiar with East of the Sun, West of the Moon as a fairy tale. So I think that will make it a lot of fun to read this one and discover it without a lot of spoilers, and especially as the weather starts getting colder. This looks like a good one to read on a chilly day with a warm drink. But if you thought that was way too many books for a fall library haul already, that is actually not the end, because I have 3 more books on hold, and they are The Princess Bride, Assistant to the Villain, and One Dark Window, which all had a ton of holds on them at the library. So I'm still waiting. I may be waiting on those for quite some time. I think One Dark Window still has like over 40 holds on it at the library, so it may be more like a winter library haul by that point than a fall library haul. But yeah, I am not so patiently waiting on those. And those are yet more books that that have the elements of fairy tale-ness and coziness and fantasy trope-ness and maybe a little bit of creepiness and mysteryness that the rest of these books have in them that make me think that they would be good fall reads. And the other reason that I promised that I would explain why I got all of these books at this time was that they are all kind of inspiration for the book that I am about to write myself, which I am planning to write for NaNoWriMo. I may start it before NaNoWriMo, but by the end of this fall, I am planning to draft another novel myself. And I haven't officially announced it yet, but the books that I just showed you are a clue as for some of the inspiration or some of the similar elements that the story that I'm about to draft is going to have. So if you are interested in finding out about that story when I announce it, I am planning to officially announce this book this Saturday through my email list. And if you would like to sign up for my email list, you can find a link to that down below in the description, and then you will find out about that new novel when it comes out. So if you are a fan of these types of fairy tale-ish cozy fantasy with some fantasy tropes that are maybe used in a little bit of an unusual way, I think maybe you will enjoy finding out about the new book that I'm going to be writing for NaNoWriMo. And if you're doing NaNoWriMo, please let me know in the comments, and maybe we can connect on the NaNoWriMo website or something once that gets started. I'm excited. I think it's going to be a lot of fun to write a new book this fall. I really can't wait, and I would love to have you join my email list so that you can find out more about this book when I announce it later this week. I would also love to hear in the comments about the books that you are reading this fall, or books that you just think are really good fit for fall, or what fall kinds of activities you like to do. And if you would like to see more videos like this, more author interviews like the one that I did last week, don't forget to subscribe. And until I post that next video, thank you for journeying with me. Bye.